3 days before my son's wedding, I was sitting in the waiting room of my cardiologist's office when the woman next to me leaned over and said very quietly, "I need to tell you something about your future daughter-in-law, and I need you to promise you won't react." "Not here." I looked at her. She was maybe 75, white-haired, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, hands folded in her lap like she was sitting in church. I didn't recognize her. I told her I didn't know who she was. "My name is Harriet," she said. "I was a home help aide for 15 years. The last family I worked for was the Fentons in Clearwater." I knew that name. My son's fiancée had lived in Clearwater before she moved to Savannah. "She was there," Harriet said. "The daughter. She was there when the old man signed everything over." The receptionist called someone else's name. Harriet didn't look up. Neither did I. "He had 3 strokes," she said. "By the third one he could barely hold a pen, and she stood right beside him." I asked her to please tell me everything. "Before I go any further, I want you to know something. I am 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a high school English teacher in Savannah, Georgia. I raised my son alone after my husband Martin passed away in 2014 from pancreatic cancer. He was 58. He never met the woman our son brought home. Some days I'm grateful for that. Some days I'm not sure. I am not a dramatic person. I am not the kind of woman who makes scenes or holds grudges or lies awake imagining the worst. I kept Martin's study exactly as he left it for 2 years because I couldn't bear to move his books. But that's different. That's grief, not drama. I want you to understand that what I'm about to tell you is not something I went looking for. It found me in a waiting room on a Tuesday afternoon while I was trying to remember if I'd taken my blood pressure medication that morning. My son's name is Jonah. He is 37 years old. He has his father's laugh and his father's stubbornness and a talent for choosing people who need to be saved. His first serious girlfriend was a woman recovering from addiction. His second was divorcing an abusive man. Each time he gave everything he had, and each time it ended, he was hollowed out for months. I never said a word about any of it. I figured that was his business. I figured he'd find his way. Then he met Celeste. She came into his life. Then he met Celeste. She came into his life in February of 2023. He was working as a structural engineer on a renovation project in Savannah's historic district, and she was the interior designer the developer had hired. The first time he brought her to dinner, she wore a cream-colored blazer and told me she'd grown up in Tallahassee, that her parents were both gone, that she was essentially on her own in the world. I made pot roast. She said it was the best meal she'd had in years. She said she'd never really had a mother who cooked. She looked at me with these pale gray eyes and said, "You're so lucky to have each other." I felt something pull in my chest. The specific kind of longing that some people put on like a coat when they want you to open a door for them. I recognized it. I'd seen it in students for 30 years. But I told myself I was being uncharitable. I told myself she was sincere. By Christmas, she had a drawer in Jonah's apartment. By March, she had a key. By May, he called me on a Sunday evening and asked if he could bring her over for dinner because he had something to tell me. He proposed that same day, right there at my kitchen table. He pulled out the ring and she cried and I cried. And Martin's absence was so loud in that room I could barely hear anything else. I said I was happy for them. I meant it mostly. I want Jonah to have someone. I want him to have what Martin and I had. I just wasn't sure that what I was watching was that. The wedding was planned for October, a small ceremony at a venue just outside Savannah, a restored farmhouse with Spanish moss and a garden. They wanted 50 guests. Simple, they said. Intimate. Celeste's contribution to the planning was mostly aesthetic. She knew what she wanted, which was beautiful and also slightly impractical, and also always the more expensive option. She deferred to me on the family side of things, which I appreciated, but there was something underneath that deference that I couldn't name. A waiting quality. Like she was patient about things in the way that people are patient, when they know the outcome. In August, Jonah called to tell me they were updating their finances. Setting things up together, he said. Combining accounts, making sure everything was in order. He mentioned that Celeste had helped him meet with a financial planner. He mentioned something about a joint trust. I said that sounded sensible. I didn't ask for details. Martin handled most of our finances, and after he died, I worked with an accountant, but I wasn't someone who asked probing questions about other people's money arrangements. Now I wish I had. But I didn't know yet. I didn't know anything yet. And then I was sitting in that waiting room on a Tuesday in early October, 3 days before the wedding, and Harriet was telling me about the Fenton family. The old man's name was Gerald Fenton, 81 years old, widower, retired pharmacist. He had a small house in Clearwater and a bank account that his late wife had built over 50 years of teaching elementary school. Around $400,000, Harriet said, plus a life insurance policy, plus the house. Celeste had been his home organizer. That was her previous business, before she moved into interior design. She came twice a week to help him sort paperwork, coordinate his medications, manage his schedule. Gerald had no children. His closest living relative was a nephew in Ohio who called twice a year. She was very devoted, Harriet said. She brought him food sometimes, drove him to appointments. 3 months after she started coming, Gerald changed his will. 18 months after she started coming, Gerald had his first stroke. By the third stroke, Harriet said, he was confused most of the time. He didn't always know what day it was. She paused, but he could still hold a pen. Gerald Fenton died in January of 2022. He left the house, the account, and the life insurance to Celeste Beaumont. The nephew contested it. The case went on for 14 months before the nephew ran out of money to fight. I tried to tell them, Harriet said. I called the lawyer's office. I wrote a letter. I said he wasn't in the right state of mind when he signed those documents. Nobody listened. Her voice didn't waver. She sounded like a woman who had already made peace with being ignored and was trying one more time anyway. I saw her name in the paper last month. Engagement announcement. I live in Savannah now. My daughter lives here. I looked up the family. She looked at me directly. I looked up you. The receptionist called my name. I stood up. My legs felt strange, like I had to think about how to use them. I told Harriet to please wait. I told the nurse I needed a few more minutes. I sat back down. Is there anything documented? I asked. Any record? The nephew's lawyer has it all, she said. I gave them everything I had, statements, dates, my notes from my care log. She reached into her purse and took out a folded piece of paper. She'd written a name and a phone number. This is the nephew. His name is Paul Number. He's been trying to warn people. He's been trying to find out if there are others. I took the paper. Why are you telling me? I asked. Why not go to the police? I did, she said. They said there wasn't enough to charge anyone. The will was legal. The signatures were witnessed. Gerald told people he wanted to leave her something. They said he made his choices. She looked at me. Her eyes were very steady. Did he? She said. I drove home with both hands on the wheel and the piece of paper on the passenger seat. The Spanish moss was hanging low over Abercorn Street, and the October air was still warm, and I sat in my driveway for a long time after I turned off the engine. Martin's voice in my head. Not words exactly, just his presence. The particular frequency of him that I still hear when I don't know what to do. I went inside. I made coffee. I called my oldest friend, Bet, who has known me since we were 22, and who never tells me what I want to hear, which is exactly why I call her. I told her everything. Bet said, "Call Paul Fenton tonight." I called Paul Fenton that night. He answered on the second ring. When I told him who I was and who my son was marrying, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I've been hoping someone would call." Paul Fenton was 56, an accountant, steady voice, careful with his words. He walked me through it over the phone. His uncle had been lonely. His uncle had been grateful for the attention. The changes to the will had happened gradually, almost invisibly, and by the time anyone noticed, Gerald was already diminished. There was a lawyer she used, Paul said. Hamilton Rourke. He prepared the amended documents 3 times in 18 months. Every time she was present. Every time my uncle had just had some kind of medical event. A fall, a confusion episode, an infection. He paused. She was always there to help him through it. And then, right after, there would be paperwork. He emailed me everything he had that night, the amended will documents, his uncle's medical timeline, a photograph taken in the hospital the week of the third stroke, Celeste standing beside Gerald's bed, smiling at the camera. I printed it all out and spread it across Martin's desk. I am not an investigator. I am a retired English teacher who spent 30 years teaching teenagers to look for what was really being said underneath the words on the page. What I was looking at was a pattern. The same pattern, repeated. Access, trust, isolation, paperwork. And now she was standing 3 days from the altar with my son. I didn't sleep. I made a list of what I knew, what I could prove, and what I needed to find out. Then I called Jonah's godfather, a man named Leonard who had been Martin's college roommate and was now a retired judge. Leonard was 80 and sharp as a pin, and he had watched Jonah grow up from across a dinner table for 30 years. Leonard came over the next morning with his reading glasses and a yellow legal pad. He read everything I'd printed. He asked 3 questions. Then he sat back. "You have a pattern," he said. "You don't have direct proof this is happening again. But a pattern in financial abuse cases is not nothing." He tapped the legal pad with his pen. "What you need is a lawyer, estate law, elder law, and you need someone who can look at what Jonah signed." He mentioned a joint trust, I said. Leonard looked at me. "Call the lawyer today," he said. The lawyer's name was Annalise Torres. Her office was on Bull Street, and she had been recommended to me by a colleague who had used her for an estate dispute years ago. She was 45, precise, with reading glasses on a gold chain. I brought everything. The Fenton documents, the phone call notes from Paul, the engagement announcement photo, the timeline. She read through it slowly. She asked me to describe what Jonah had said about the trust. "He said they were combining finances," I said. "He said it was a joint trust. He said the financial planner Celeste recommended explained it was standard practice for married couples." "Did he tell you the name of the financial planner?" "Marcus Vine," I said. I'd looked it up after Jonah mentioned it. I'd looked up the name and seen a website and felt vaguely reassured and then let it go. Annalise typed something, looked at her screen. Her expression didn't change, but she typed something else. Then she looked up. "Marcus Vine's license was suspended in 2020, she said. "He re-registered in 2022 under a different business name. He has 2 unresolved complaints with the Georgia Secretary of State's office." She turned the screen toward me. "He also prepared documents for the estate of Gerald Fenton in Clearwater in 2021. The room went very still. "She's using the same lawyer?" I said. "The same planner?" "Same planner," Annalise said. "I can't confirm the lawyer yet, but this is a pattern of practice, not an accident." She folded her hands. "Do you know what's in the trust documents? What Jonah actually signed?" I didn't. Jonah hadn't mentioned specifics. He mentioned it the way you mention something that's already decided, a detail in a larger plan. "I need to see those documents," Annalise said, "and I need to see them before the wedding. I had 48 hours. I want to be honest with you about something." Sitting in that office, I wasn't angry yet. I was scared in a specific way that I hadn't felt since the day Martin's doctor called and used the word pancreatic. The feeling of watching something terrible arrive and knowing it will keep coming no matter what you do. But I also knew that was wrong, because this one I could stop. I drove to Jonah's apartment. He was at work. I had a key. "For emergencies," he said, though in 9 years I had never used it. I stood outside his door for a long time. I went inside. I looked for the documents in the places people keep important papers. The filing cabinet in the second bedroom. The drawer under the microwave. Martin always kept things in the drawer under the microwave. I don't know why. It's apparently hereditary. I found the folder. Joint Revocable Trust. Jonah Arthur Hale and Celeste Lynn Beaumont. 32 pages. I photographed every page and left before he came home. That night, Annalise called me at 7:30. "I've gone through it," she said. "The surface structure is standard. Joint trust, shared assets, both parties as co-trustees." She paused. "But there are two provisions buried in Section 14 and Section 22. If one party is deemed incapacitated or absent for more than 30 days, the other party assumes sole trustee authority immediately, with no oversight requirement and no minimum waiting period." I closed my eyes. "His pension," I said. "He has a pension from his first engineering firm." "It's listed in Schedule A," she said, "as a trust asset. Martin and I had started that pension. We'd made contributions for 6 years before Jonah aged out of our plan and started his own. It was not a small amount." "What can we do?" I asked. "I can file an emergency petition to delay the trust activation," she said, "on the grounds of fraud and undue influence. But I need a signed statement from Paul Fenton. I need the Gerald Fenton documents. And I need something that connects Marcus Vine to Celeste directly, beyond just the Fenton estate." She paused. "And I need to know what you want to do about the wedding." I sat with that for a moment. "The wedding is in 2 days," I said. "I know. My son is in love with this woman." "I know that too." I thought about Jonah at 7 years old, standing in the church at his father's cousin's wedding, watching the bride walk down the aisle with his eyes enormous. "I want to do that someday," he told me in the car ride home. "I want someone to look at me like that." He was 7 years old. I thought about him at 37, calling me on a Sunday to tell me he'd asked someone to marry him, his voice cracking just slightly in the middle of the sentence. "I need to talk to him first," I said, "before anything else." There was a pause. "That's your right," Annalise said. "But be careful about what you say before we have the petition ready. If she knows you found the Fenton connection, things could move fast." The next morning, I called Jonah and asked if he could come to dinner. Just the two of us. I told him I was making his father's lasagna recipe, the one Martin used to make on Sundays in the winter. He said of course. He arrived at 6. He was tired and happy in the way that people are the day before their wedding, stretched thin with anticipation. He kissed my cheek and went straight to the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water and sat down at the same stool he'd sat on since he was 9 years old. I let him talk for a while. He talked about the rehearsal dinner, about the seating chart, about the friend who was flying in from Denver. His face was open and light in a way I hadn't seen in years. I set the lasagna on the table between us. I sat down. I said, "Jonah, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear all of it before you respond." He looked at me. He knew my voice when I was being serious. He always had. I told him about the waiting room. I told him about Harriet and Gerald Fenton and Paul's phone call. I told him about Marcus Vine and the suspended license and the Fenton connection. I set the printed documents on the table beside his plate. I told him about the clause in Section 22. He didn't speak for a long time. Then he said, "Mom." I waited. "I know she had a hard life," he said. "She told me about Gerald Fenton. She said he was like a grandfather to her. She said she took care of him and he wanted to leave her something because she had no one." I looked at him. "She told you about the will?" I said. "She said his nephew was greedy and tried to contest it because he wanted money he hadn't earned." His voice was careful. "She cried when she told me. She said it was the hardest thing she'd been through." I picked up the photograph of Celeste standing by Gerald's hospital bed and set it in front of him. Then I set down the document from Annalise's office, the one with sections 14 and 22 highlighted in yellow. He picked up the document. He read slowly. He set it down. He looked at the photograph for a long time. "I need to call her," he said. "Jonah." Mom, I need to call her. He called her. I stepped into the living room and stood at the window and looked out at the street. I could hear the low murmur of his voice. At one point it rose, then went quiet, then rose again. He came into the living room 12 minutes later. His face was different, not collapsed exactly, more like something had been removed from behind it. She said, "You've never liked her," he said. "She said you've been looking for reasons to break us up since the beginning." "Is that what she said?" "She said the nephew is vindictive. She said she knew this would happen." "Did you ask her about Marcus Vine?" I said. "Did you ask her why the planner she hired had a suspended license and worked on Gerald Fenton's estate?" He was quiet. "She said that was a coincidence," he said. "That she'd used Marcus before she knew about the Fenton situation, that she didn't know his license had been suspended." I sat down. "Jonah," I said, "I'm not asking you not to love her. I'm asking you to look at the documents Annalise sent. I'm asking you to call Paul Fenton yourself right now, tonight, before the wedding. If you talk to him and you still believe her, I will put on my dress tomorrow and I will sit in the front row and I will mean every word of the toast I've written." He looked at me for a long time. Then he picked up his phone. He called Paul Fenton at 9:30 at night. I don't know what Paul told him. I went to the kitchen and washed the dishes and waited. I could hear Jonah's voice, but I couldn't make out the words. It went on for 40 minutes. When he came into the kitchen, he sat down at the stool again. He didn't say anything for a while. I turned off the water and dried my hands and waited. "She was there," he said finally, "when the second will amendment was signed. Paul said there's a notary log. She was listed as witness." I sat down across from him. "She told me she barely knew the lawyer who drew up the documents," he said. "She said she'd never met Marcus Vine in person. The clock on the microwave said 10:47. The wedding was at 4 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. Jonah had $120 of flowers at the venue and a cake and 50 guests." "What do you want to do?" I asked. He put his head in his hands. He stayed like that for a long time. "I don't want to believe it," he said. "I know." "She cried," he said. "She actually cried." "I know, honey. How do I?" He stopped. "How do I look at everything and not see it differently now?" I didn't answer, because there was no answer that would make this smaller. At midnight, Jonah called the venue. He called his best friend. He called Celeste's number 3 times and she didn't answer. By morning, she had blocked him on every platform. Her things were out of his apartment by the time he drove home at noon. She had been ready for this. That was the part that stayed with him the longest afterward, I think. That she had been ready. The wedding didn't happen. I called the guests. Jonah sat in Martin's old chair in the study and didn't speak for most of the afternoon. I made soup. I sat nearby and read and didn't push him to talk. There was nothing to say that would make it shorter. Grief has its own duration. In November, Annalise filed a formal complaint with the Georgia State Bar regarding Marcus Vine. Paul Fenton's attorney reopened the Clearwater case with the new documentation. A week later, 2 other families came forward. A woman in Tampa, an elderly couple in Ocala. All of them had used Marcus Vine. All of them had experienced the same pattern. Annalise called me in December to say that the Georgia Attorney General's office had opened an investigation. Vine's remaining license was suspended. Celeste's name appeared in 2 of the new complaints as a referring party. I asked Annalise what would happen to Celeste. "That depends on what they can prove," she said. "If the other victims can document undue influence, if there are records of her financial benefit, if someone on the inside cooperates." She paused. "It's slow. It's not satisfying. But it's moving. It's not satisfying. But it's moving. It's not satisfying." That was exactly right. I had wanted, somewhere underneath everything, for there to be a moment. A clean confrontation, a clear revelation, a room full of witnesses. I had wanted the thing that stories give you, that instant when the truth lands and everyone sees it at once. What I got instead was paperwork, phone calls, a slow, bureaucratic unraveling that Jonah and I weren't even at the center of. But Jonah was safe. His pension was intact. The trust had never been activated. That was enough. Most days, that was enough. Jonah came for Christmas. He was quieter than usual. He helped me put up the tree the way Martin used to, methodically, lights first, then the ornaments his father had collected from every place we'd ever traveled. There's one from a gas station in rural Alabama in 1999, painted ceramic, slightly crooked. Martin bought it as a joke, and it became the one we always put up first. Jonah held it in his hands for a moment before he hung it. "Did Dad ever tell you about the time he almost made a terrible mistake?" he asked. I smiled. "Which time?" he laughed. It was short and surprised, a laugh that snuck up on him. Martin's laugh. "I keep thinking about it," he said. "How you just showed me the documents. You didn't tell me what to do. You just showed me." "You're 37, I said. "You didn't need me to tell you." "I almost didn't look," he said. "I almost told you to stay out of it." "I know. Thanks for not staying out of it." I hung the Alabama ornament on the highest branch I could reach. In February, Jonah went on a weekend trip to Charleston with his friend from Denver. He texted me a photo of the harbor. Just the water and the sky, no caption. I texted back a small heart. Small things. We're made of small things. I think about Harriet sometimes, in that waiting room, watching me from across the row of chairs and deciding to say something. She'd tried before and been dismissed. She had no reason to believe I'd be different, but she folded up that piece of paper and carried it in her purse anyway, on the chance that one day someone would need it. I wrote her a letter in January. I told her what had happened. I told her it wasn't over legally, but that my son was okay. I told her what she'd done had mattered. She wrote back, 2 pages, careful handwriting, the kind you learn in schools that don't exist anymore. She said she was glad. She said Gerald had been a kind man. She said she still thought about him. I think about Martin a lot. I always do, but differently in the last year. I think about the way he raised Jonah to trust people, to lead with generosity, to believe that people were doing their best. Those are not wrong things to believe. They are good things. But the world will test them, and I think what I gave Jonah that October night was not the opposite of what Martin gave him. It was the other half of it. Trust people, and know the difference between trust and blindness. You can't always know. Sometimes people fool you completely, and there's no waiting room angel sitting next to you with a folded piece of paper. Sometimes the pattern doesn't show itself until it's too late. I know that. I live in the same world everyone else does. But sometimes you get lucky. Sometimes someone decides at 75 that it's worth trying one more time. I'm glad I answered. I'm glad Jonah listened. And I'm glad that somewhere in Clearwater, Gerald Fenton's story became part of the reason my son is okay. If you're watching this and you have children, grown children, who you worry about, who you don't want to overstep with, who you think need to figure things out for themselves, I understand that feeling. I lived in that feeling for years. But there is a difference between control and protection, between interference and love. If something doesn't feel right, say so. Show what you know. Let them decide. And trust that you raised someone capable of seeing clearly when it counts. Martin would have done the same thing. I'm sure of it. He just would have made better lasagna while he did it.